Here?
So I am an alum, and I had friends, male friends, because back in the day there was no female, other than girlfriends of mechanics and drivers. But women did not have a substantial role in design, and a lot of it was because no one thought about having small girls drive buggies. So when I came here, it looked a little bit different. What also looked different was after I graduated, I went to graduate school, worked at another university or institution. So by the time I came here, there were many, many more organizations active in Buggy. And many more organizations that were competitive. And so if you look back at the history, back in the 60s, which I wasn't here for those years, but mostly led by men, Greek letter organizations. And then independents like Fringe and CIA started coming into the fold, and then as we know today, there are many more independent organizations. But I would say, the late 70s or the very end of the 70s when I came in the 80s, we saw a boom in Buggy in terms of people involved competitively. And I would say, and I was very, very, very young, not much older than Aaron, I had a degree in higher education administration. I understood almost all elements of my job, and Buggy eluded me because of the nature of Buggy and the mechanics of Buggy. So that I was okay not understanding, but I understand systems and I understand, administratively. So I could look at things, but it took me a really long time to understand it and feel comfortable that I could sort of insert myself. And I would do that in other parts of my job, and I was totally comfortable. I was, and I don't think it was because I didn't have experience with Buggy. I think the students running Buggy, even though they had an advisor in student activities after Bob left, who really understood Buggy, because it takes years to do that, there's sort of a lapse. So it took me a while to catch up to speed, and I would go ask faculty in mechanical engineering to help, and it wasn't that they weren't interested, but their interest was really about helping during design competition. And I think some of it was the worry about the litigious nature that Buggy could cause, and I think people just didn't have the kind of time. So it ended up being student run, which we pride ourselves in at the university, but I do feel this way. You have to set students up to succeed, and it's up to a good advisor, regardless of what the organization is, to set up structures and systems and a forum so things can happen, whether it's encouraging people. You need mandatory meetings, and we can talk about those sorts of things, where I could step aside after a couple years and convince the executive committee that those are things we hadn't been doing that they need to do. So I would go to the Buggy meetings, and I would sit there realizing, boy, I don't understand, and that was okay, but I needed to sort of figure out how this, which I could see was starting to get out of hand, because the students were making too many decisions, because we were getting so competitive, and there were so many organizations involved. And if you look at Buggy books from the 60s to the 70s to the 80s and to the mid-90s, you can see this unbelievable increase. And we're not at that level now. I don't know if we'll ever go back there. Resources were different. There were more organizations, there were more fraternities that had Buggies. So it was different. And I think it's okay where we're at now. I wouldn't want to lose more organizations. But at that point in time, we were running many, many heats of 3, which, we don't do as much now. So things that I sort of impacted before I feel like I had my major impact in 1986 after the unfortunate incident with the fire that we had on race day in 1986 were things like listening to alums who weren't out that many years, who came to me because they felt I was approachable, and they were worried about some of the things that they had seen. And these are young alums now, older alums, who really cared about Buggy. And it wasn't that they cared about their particular organization above and beyond. It was really about Buggy, and they were seeing things that they'd never seen before: the treatment of chemicals on tires, people trying to cut corners because they wanted to win at all costs. And so that was, making me nervous, because I didn't know what to do with that. But things that I could have an impact on were, when I first got here, free rolls were only like one day of the weekend. And so we were able to get 2 days, and it just made sense to me. We needed 2 weekends, 2 days out of the weekend. So I got more confident, and then unfortunately, or fortunately, this accident happened in '86, and that's when I decided, unlike some of the other places where I feel much more confident, that the tail was wagging the dog, and we're going to just do something. And it really was, it wasn't about me. My ego might have been a little bit involved because this was happening under my watch, but there were too many signs, and Tom would say things to me, and Lou would say things to me. Certain organizations were treating their tires, and accidents were waiting to happen. And we kind of put our foot on some things, and it would depend on the executive committee chair. And I always had good kids, and I always felt bad for them because I did not want something bad to happen under their watch, because that would be the worst. So this fire happened, which you all know about, correct? The hexane and APO.
Well, actually, yeah.
Okay,
Go
I
ahead
can
and talk about that.
So I'm not even sure if it was the first or second day of race day, but it was in '86, and I can remember the chairperson's name, who probably wasn't happy with me when it was over because it was under her watch and it was hard. So in the truck at the bottom of the hill, and I'm at the top of the hill in the same role that your Buggy advisor has, sort of being there, because I think we always stand there to deal with, like, if there's problems. The Buggy chair would come say, Casey, this is happening, or SDC, we got to come to the bottom of the hill with me. So you want to be that point, but you're always there for the students to support them, even if you disagree. So I'm up there, and then we find out there's this flash fire in a rental truck, and those rental trucks are also, they're new within the last 15, 20 years. There used to be tents out there, and the trucks have grown. So at the bottom in that, and don't forget in '86 there were a lot more Buggy trucks down there. So they were apparently using hexane, and you would know, you're a chemistry major, right? You know what that is. So there was a flash fire, and the two young men who were from ATO were concerned enough to get her in the Buggy out of the truck. So that was the first order of things, and they did get burned, and they went to the hospital. We followed up, and they had serious burns on their hands and arms. They did get her out of the Buggy, and we didn't have to cancel races that day. We concluded, but it was serious, obviously. And I looked around just from an administrative perspective, and only 3 organizations, if that, had fire extinguishers that could put the fire out. So I'm thinking that's like an administrative thing that, what, if you're going to do this on my watch, this whole thing is going to get revisited. So that's when we went to this complete rewrite of the rules, which really evolved from 17 pages, and I actually bought, and I can hold these up, brought. So this young man, who I actually got to know well before my time, was a beta, and he was a Tepper former GSIA master student when he was in charge of Buggy. And Jeff ran a great show, and this was his guide to running Sweepstakes, and he worked through this man that was my predecessor in student activities. And if you read the rules, they'll kind of make you laugh, but if you followed them, you'd do a good job. So these rules kind of got watered down to like 17 pages of rules that we were using until 1986. And if you read those rules, you didn't have to have helmet, but that was because Buggies were supposed to be built so substantially that you could withhold a crash, and you didn't need a helmet. So there was no way to prove that. And if we had a bad accident, what if that wasn't the case? Some people did wear helmets. Some people wore literally bathing caps, harnesses. So many things weren't in place that we felt we needed in place. And we tried to get some of the faculty, and again, they were kind of reticent to do that. So it really was a core group of me not really being able to write any rules that related to the technical issues about safety, but getting these rules, and I know they were pretty convoluted, but the intent was, I think, correct, and people for about 10 years really understood them. But it was Lou, Conley, Frank helped from a distance, a guy, I laugh because he's still here, Dave Lamont, who teaches in Tepper, and David was a Sigma Nu, and my first couple years was very involved, and he ran a safe Buggy, so that's why he was tapped. Some people from Theta Xi, who back in the day, in the 80s, they did good stuff with their Buggies. Mark, who was the architect behind the really safe Sigma Nu Buggies. And so even with these rule changes, that sort of made Mark's Buggies become obsolete because they were so heavy and so safe. But we couldn't depend on other organizations to build Buggies like that. And as Buggies were getting lighter and lighter, that meant we needed all the more reason to have safety in place. So that's when the rules, dropping T-bars. I just saw that and said we can't have dropping T-bars. Can students drop, retractable ones that are go back up? And we decided they can't. It's too dangerous because it's a lovely idea, but they used to drop and they could just, cause a horrible accident, and it could go through the girl's windshield in another buggy. So, we could do that if buggies ran by themselves, and we toyed with that for a while. Buggies are going too fast, let them run independently when we get to race day. So we did all kinds of things. And if you know the rules, everything from how race day gets decided and the whole thing about passing on the hills and how many times you have to go down. And that wasn't in place. So there were really all these rippling, ramifications. The streets, have always been a problem. One year in the middle of a race at the top of Hill 1, water just came out, a fountain of water just came out from the top of Hill 1 underneath the blacktop. Tom would know what year it was. Yeah, or Lou would know. Just like, and we still had the races, and we had to figure out how to go around the, we've had. I laugh when I think about all the things that have happened. Other than that accident, it could be worse. I don't know the details, but there is a young man who's paralyzed from a buggy accident that wasn't during trials or race day, and that's unfortunate. I don't know the individual. I've never really had contact with him. It was before my time, and it was horrible, obviously. And again, it wasn't something that ended up jeopardizing, buggy. But I'm always cognizant that when I was in charge, and even now when I'm out there, we want to make it safe. We don't want some accident because we're not paying attention to what organizations are doing, because I don't expect them to always know what to do because they want to win. So I think, that's where the young alumni can help with that, the older alumni, and I think that's what's important, that as people graduate and get sort of look differently at buggy, in a helpful way. On a sort of a sideline, one of the funny things in my time with Buggy was that RPI, Rensselaer Poly Institute, Polytech, called me, and they said, how do you start Buggy? We want to start it. And I said, the answer is no, you don't want to start it. Not because they would be taking something away from us. It's just, it's hard. Back in the early 70s, before I got here, because we were having such a hard time with the streets and they weren't in good shape, and the permits were it was hard to get the permits years ago because the city was sort of quaking under all the people that complained that we were taking these access routes off. And so we really went into the park, the former Dean of Student Affairs, Earl Swank, to look at other routes that would be less congested, but there was no vantage point, sort of like the routes that they use for the Grand Prix. They'd be pretty dangerous too. So, the university, is interested in seeing this work, but I don't think most people in the university know what it takes, behind the scenes. And, Casey, just the permits are painful. The push practices were the thing I liked least. They were hard. Yeah.
And there's a lot of danger involved in push practice.
Well, people do goofy things, and, it's not clear cut, and the people who live in park mansions,
Yeah, they don't really like it.
They don't like it, and I would always go, and again, when I did it, bring them letters and say, I'd walk letters over, and I'd walk letters down to Phipps, and when we were doing push practices, and when you let them know what you're supposed to do, is when you open the door for phone calls. And I remember getting phone calls, I don't mind the event, but I just am so offended by the young women who are swearing. And I never remember young women swearing when I was in college, and these are elderly people. So, you just hear so many, and again, that's, maybe they don't care anymore, but oh my goodness. There are so many stories. Dogs on the course, people rushing through the course trying to get to the hospital, because their wife is in labor. And that's understandable. So we have to be good neighbors. And that's where it gets hard. And that's where your executive committee has to, early on when you work with your committee, you talk about those things. It took me a long time. So Casey sort of has the benefit of my mistakes, and but she has her own things to figure out, because I forget some of the things, like, did you do this, did we do that, even I think 2 years ago cops were in the wrong place, it's like no, the cop isn't there, he's got to be at that intersection, and sometimes those cops don't show up at the right time for free rolls. It gets complicated, but things have changed over time, and for the good. I don't want another accident to necessitate there being some tremendous rule change. So I think it's always important to be vigilant, that it's too important event to lose, which is all the more reason we have to be vigilant.